Bela Lugosi became an instant horror icon for his portrayal of Count Dracula in the 1931 film.
I am Dracula.
He gave us many other classic horror performances, but there could have been more. In those days, movie studios would usually give long-term contracts to their stars and continuously develop projects for them. Universal gave one to Boris Karloff, but not to Bela Lugosi. He was also severely typecast as Dracula, which eventually caused his career to decline and lowered his standing in Hollywood. And for whatever reason, he just seemed to have bad luck. There were many movies that he was supposed to do and was considered for that either didn't get made or were made without him. I've been researching these movies and when possible, reading unproduced screenplays. I'm also a huge fan of his and watch his movies all the time. And I've come up with the top 10 of his unproduced films. And I'm basing my ranking on how good I think the movie would have actually been based on my research. And as a fan, how badly do I want to see it? So get ready, my children of the night. Because here are the top 10 movies that Bela Lugosi almost made. Number 10. Star Strangled Rhythm. This was announced in 1943 in The Hollywood Reporter, but nothing really came of it. And it was going to star Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, and Peter Lorre. And it was going to be a horror comedy where Bela and Boris play horror stars who get possessed by the scary characters that they played in movies.
Lugosi, are you interested in...
Pardon me. I'm coming.
Why, I didn't hear anyone calling.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, I understand.
Bela enjoyed spoofing his image, and the three of them had previously worked well together, and you'll find out. But what really intrigues me is the plot. I like how it's meta and self-referential, with them basically playing variations of themselves. And with getting possessed by their scary characters, it would have been like a predecessor to some of the ideas in Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Unfortunately, this was going to be done at RKO and not Universal, so they wouldn't have been possessed by Dracula and Frankenstein's monster, which is why it's lower on my list. But still, if this project was done right, it could have been really something to see. Number 9. The Vampire's Tomb. This was going to be made by Ed Wood, who was a low-budget and sort of schlocky writer, producer, and director, who became best friends with Bela Lugosi during the final years of his life. Now, he had several projects lined up for Bela, but could never get the financing. Now, his movies Plan 9 from Outer Space and Glen or Glenda have kind of a bad reputation. But his Bride of the Monster, which had a bigger budget and is a more traditional Bela Lugosi film, is actually pretty good. And I've read the script of Vampire's Tomb and actually enjoyed it. The story is basically a remake of London After Midnight, which was also remade as Mark of the Vampire, where a detective sets up a vampire charade in order to find out who the murderer is. And at the end, you find out there are no vampires. And it was just an act. In London After Midnight, Lon Chaney played both the detective and the vampire. In Mark of the Vampire, Bela only played the vampire. But here, he was going to play the detective, Dr. Acula, which is a fantastic name. He was going to be in full Dracula attire, and during the charade, it hints that he's a vampire too. You may count on my assistance. Now, London After Midnight is a lost film, but there are some scenes in here that I like better than Mark of the Vampire. I always thought it was ridiculous that normal police would come up with a vampire hoax, but I could totally see Bela Lugosi, with his mysterious persona, coming up with it. As you now know, this is Helen, Lucille's twin sister. The wig to match the black hair of Lucille. From that point, it simply becomes the power of suggestion. Lucille's coffin was switched for the one previously healed. And with my electronically charged cape and a good illusion, and we were successful. Clever, am I not? There are even plans on doing a Dr. Acula TV series, and I could totally see further adventures with this character. Now you may think I'm crazy, but I like Ed Wood's movies. But realistically, his output, even at his best, is not going to top Universal's horror films, which is why this is number 9. Number 8, The Wolfman vs. Dracula. This was going to be a sequel to Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and it was actually going to be done in color. Jack Pierce did a Wolfman makeup test to see how the makeup would look in color, but then after a few weeks the project was just dropped, and the screenplay sat in a box in the writer's garage for 40 years. As usual, Larry Talbot is brought back to life and wants to die. Count Dracula is interested in Anatole the Hangman's daughter Yvonne, but because she wears a cross around her neck, he hasn't bitten her. Larry goes to Anatole, tells him he's a werewolf and that he wants to die. Anatole doesn't believe him, but tells him to get help from Dracula, who's posing as a doctor. So that Yvonne doesn't have to marry Dracula, Larry marries and falls in love with her. But Dracula tricks Larry into removing the cross. In Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, Count Dracula and Larry Talbot have a brief but tense scene together, so I could see them having exciting chemistry. They also came up with a logical way to set them up as rivals, and they make creative use of Dracula's ability to metamorphosize into a wolf by having him attack people in wolf form and letting people think it was Larry. What Anatole means is, did the girl see you and the wolf at the same time? No, I don't see how she could. Oh, I see. You think I killed Geza? Did you ever hear of lycanthropy? It is a form of madness. Its victims honestly believe that they turn into wild beasts under the full moon. It is the origins for all werewolf legends. This is just as much fun as Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, and anytime you have Bela as Dracula, it's a win. But I'd rather have him be in this movie than in Universal's other non-Lugosi Dracula films, because in Son of Dracula, Dracula gets outsmarted by his bride. In House of Frankenstein, Dracula tells Dr. Niemann that he'll do anything if he protects him, and in both House movies, he dies early on. And I feel that these weaknesses are out of character for Bela's cunning and strong interpretation, whereas this script seems more in line with it. Number 7, Mystery House. This was going to be a whole series of horror films starring Bela Lugosi, and they were going to be based on the different episodes of a horror radio series, which was also going to star Bela Lugosi, where every week he'd play a new scary character, there'd be a guest star, and the stories were actually going to be based on the different horror plays that had been performed at the famous Grand Guignol Theatre in Paris, which was known for its macabre shows with lots of blood. Sorry, that made me thirsty. They never made any of the movies. They only did a pilot episode of the radio show, which never aired. But from listening to it, I think both the movies and the radio show would have been spectacular. The pilot episode, titled The Thirsty Death, features Bela Lugosi as a jealous husband who suspects his wife is cheating on him. During the night, he goes to her and her suspected lover and injects one of them with rabies. The next morning, he tells them this, but doesn't say which one it is. Very soon, the one who is infected will begin to feel the symptoms. First, just a general feeling of sickness, steadily getting worse. Then I'm the one. I woke up feeling ill. And what about me? I thought it was malaria. Next will come the awful thirst. Then the final stage. The transformation into a snarling, frothing, howling beast that will bite and tear. I swear that we are innocent. Have you no mercy? I have only advice. There in the drawer is a knife. When the mad person attacks the healthy one, the knife will prove useful. Goodbye. It's later revealed that Bela didn't inject either one of them, but they worked themselves up into such a frenzy that the suspected lover kills Bela's wife. The next episode was going to be about a woman being buried alive, and the series was going to continue with various gruesome tales from the Grand Guignol. So regardless of the episodes they picked, that source material would have made for some creepy and bizarre movies, and given Bela a big variety of spooky roles. Number 6. Frankenstein. After Bela's enormous success in Dracula, Universal Studios offered him Frankenstein, and Robert Florey was going to direct. Now, Bela actually really wanted to play Dr. Frankenstein, and later on he played a lot of mad scientists. But the studio insisted he play the monster. Now, there are 3 different accounts of what happened next. Number 1, Bela turned down the role because it had no dialogue and it would be under a heavy makeup. Number 2, when James Whale became the director, he dropped Bela from the project. Then there's number 3, which was Bela's own account of what happened. That he turned down the role and then personally lined them up with Boris Karloff. I'm thinking it's option 1 or 2. Regardless, this is one of the most famous what-ifs in horror film history. And all we have are memories of a lost makeup test and an original screenplay to tell us what it might have been like. Robert Florey and Paul Avino, the cinematographer on the test, said that Bela's makeup basically looked like the Boris Karloff makeup, which makes sense considering the poster that Universal made. However, do remember that Bela would have looked better than he did in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. He was younger, stronger, healthier, and his face was thinner, so he would have looked more cadaverous. Plus, as the original design, it would be more perfectly fitted for his face. Jack Pierce claimed that Bela rejected this design and insisted on applying his own very hairy makeup, perhaps resembling the original Thomas Edison version, and that the makeup melted right away. And Edward Van Sloan remembered it as looking like the Golem. Carl Laemmle Jr. didn't remember what it looked like, just that he didn't like it. But that's what tests are for, and there's room for improvement. Now, the script follows the film fairly closely, except the monster isn't sympathetic. He's more like a vicious animal, which does make sense because Dr. Frankenstein accidentally gave him a criminal brain. And there's this one night scene in the village, where the villagers hear the monster howling. It sounds like the cry of a werewolf. Yeah, some evil thing is abroad. It's atmospheric and would have been a groovy nod to Dracula. He kills his family, including 2 children, in cold blood. And the Maria scene plays out differently too. Like in the movie, she's playing with the flowers. But the monster is drinking water from the lake, and he sees her, and slashes through the water to get to her. Maria says, "Who are you? I am Maria." The monster gives her a weird look. She says, "Would you like one of my flowers?" Then the monster's shadow falls over her face, and his hands reach towards her. The scene ends, and then about a minute later, her father is carrying Maria's dead body into town. So he would have been more sinister and not sympathetic like the Boris Karloff portrayal. Now that complexity is what made Boris Karloff so compelling. But Bela excelled at playing pure evil, so I think this would have worked for him and he would have been really scary. Plus, without Boris Karloff as competition, he would have been the main horror star of the 1930s. Universal was already planning on him starring as the Hunchback of Notre Dame and as the Invisible Man. But the same way I feel that Bela was born to play Dracula, I feel that Boris Karloff was born to play Frankenstein's monster, and that Colin Clive was born to play Dr. Frankenstein. And I'm not willing to replace them, which is why this is number 6. Number 5. Jack the Ripper. In November of 1938, it said in The Hollywood Reporter that A.P. Waxman was trying to make a deal with Universal or Paramount to make a movie about Jack the Ripper. Now, Jack the Ripper was a notorious and still unknown serial killer in London during the late 1800s who murdered prostitutes in the Whitechapel district. And it was going to star Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, and John Barrymore. So a great cast. But nothing ever came of it. But what intrigues me is years later, Bela and his wife Lillian said that they regretted that he was not cast as Jack the Ripper in the 1944 film The Lodger. Now that was 6 years later. So he must have really wanted to play Jack the Ripper. Bela's early years were at the National Theatre of Budapest, where they emphasize how you approach your character.
You see, in the National Theatre of Hungary in Budapest, all the great character parts are played by 4 or 5 different players. Each competes with the other. Each plays a part in accordance with their own conception. And the audience is just as much interested in the actor's conception of the role than it's interested in the play itself.
When he played Dracula on Broadway, he developed this preparation technique where he would stare into a mirror and repeat over and over, "I am Dracula, I am Dracula." And on movie sets, he was usually perfect on the first take because he had prepared at home. So this is a man who puts a lot of thought into how he was going to play a character. So if he wanted to play Jack the Ripper that bad, I feel safe in assuming he already had some ideas on how he was going to do it. Not to say that he would do it the same way, but there are certain scenes in his other movies where I could easily see him playing Jack the Ripper. Like the scene where Dracula kills a flower girl and is walking the streets of London. He blends in, but you could feel the sinister aura. And with the top hat, he does resemble the popular depiction of Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper killed prostitutes, and in Murders in the Rue Morgue, he is so creepy when he kidnaps a prostitute. Especially how he says, "A lady in distress." And Jack the Ripper mutilated and removed organs from his victims. And think of the way that Bela viciously skinned Boris Karloff alive in The Black Cat. I could see all this feeding into a really chilling and evil Jack the Ripper performance. From hell, Mr. Lusk. I send you half a kidney I took from a woman. I preserved it for you. The other half I fried and ate. I may send you the bloody knife if only you wait a little longer. Catch me if you can, Mr. Lusk. Signed, Jack the Ripper. That was one of the letters sent to the police by Jack the Ripper, or supposedly by Jack the Ripper. And I could just hear Bela reading it with sinister relish. Who knows? He might have been even scarier than Dracula. Number 4. Werewolf of London. Most people forget about this movie, because 6 years later, The Wolfman came out, and that's such a howling success. Boris Karloff was originally going to play Dr. Glendon, the main werewolf. But for whatever reason, Universal didn't want to wait for him to finish Bride of Frankenstein. So they cast Henry Hull instead. And even after Hull was cast, it was announced that Bela Lugosi would play Dr. Yogami, the second werewolf who bites Dr. Glendon and tries to steal this flower that works as an antidote away from him. But at the last minute, they cast Warner Oland instead. And this really bites. Because Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff would have put this at the same level, if not greater, than The Wolfman. The movie has a good story, atmosphere, and because werewolf movies weren't a thing yet, it has a unique werewolf mythology. But it doesn't have any horror icons. Henry Hull and Warner Oland are fine actors, but as Gregory Mank says in the documentary Lugosi the Dark Prince, a horror icon is more than just a great actor. He's a magician, he's a conjurer, and he's able to work a magic on the audience. Which not only do they believe what he's doing, despite the makeup or crazy story, but is able to enchant the audience. Indeed, Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff, with their unique voices and haunting presence, just take you to this spooky other world where it always feels like Halloween. and you don't believe that Warner Oland is a werewolf the same way you would with Bela Lugosi. In terms of performance, I think Boris would have been scarier and more sympathetic. Now with Bela, it's like Jack the Ripper again, where he seemed to really want to play a werewolf. He was up for this role. A few years later, he acquired the rights to a werewolf story called The Howling Death, which he planned on starring in, and later he even wanted to play the lead in The Wolfman. Plus, that Hungary, Romania area where Bela grew up had a strong werewolf mythology, so he probably had ideas on how he wanted to play it, which could be why his small part as Bela the Gypsy in The Wolfman is so memorable. And I think he would have brought a similar haunting quality to Dr. Yugami, as well as much more menace.
Dr. Yogami, come another day, please.
Another day will be too late. For what will happen before morning, I cannot say. For tonight is the first night of the full moon.
Exactly what do you want of me?
2 blossoms of the Malaphasa flower in there would save 2 souls tonight.
Tonight? I thought the Malaphasa was a cure.
No, an antidote. Effective only for a few hours. Won't you let me see the results of your experiment?
Sorry, when my experiment is completed, I shall show the entire world. Not before. Now, sir, I must wish you good day.
Then there is nothing more to be said. But remember this, Dr. Glendon. The werewolf instinctively seeks to kill the thing it loves best. As a movie, it would be so much more exciting. And as a horror fan, how groovy would it be to have Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff both playing werewolves fighting against each other in the same movie? Because even though they're known for playing monsters, in most of their collaborations, they're playing humans. So this would have been the only time where they were both monsters in the same film.
Number 3, Dracula's Daughter.
Dracula's Daughter still got filmed, but originally they were going to bring back Bela Lugosi to reprise his role as Count Dracula. Now hang on to your capes, guys, because this one's a mess. David O. Selznick bought the rights to the short story Dracula's Guest, which was a deleted chapter from Dracula published after Bram Stoker's death. And he had John L. Balderson, who co-wrote the Broadway play Dracula, do a treatment of it. And in his treatment, he added the character of Dracula's daughter. Universal bought the rights to that treatment, but they only had until a certain date to film it, otherwise the rights would revert back to Selznick. R.C. Sheriff wrote a first draft, and then James Whale, who really didn't want to make this, added in gay and lesbian overtones, sadomasochism, whips and chains, etc., 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 and without telling anyone, submitted it to the Breen office, which was like the censorship board, and it got rejected. R.C. Sheriff did a rewrite, but it still got rejected. So they brought in Garrett Fort, who wrote the first movie, and he had to very quickly cut down on the sex and horror, and the easy way to do that was to cut out the Dracula part. So, Bela Lugosi took a few publicity photos. He still got paid $4,000, but he did not get to be in the movie. The plan was, the first act of Dracula's Daughter was going to do the Dracula origin story, how he became a vampire. R.C. Sheriff had done research on the real Vlad Dracula, and just like Vlad, Count Dracula is a cruel man who fought against the Turks. But in this story, the horrors that he has seen in war changed him, and he shuts himself up in the castle with a group of devilish men. He has a party where his guests roll dice, and whoever gets the highest roll has first choice on the village girl he wants. One of the girl's husbands tries to stop Count Dracula, and Dracula makes the girl his daughter. As the sun sets, your entertainment will begin.
Ah, what gorgeous shadows the mountains throw.
Doesn't it thrill that fluttering little heart, Dracula's daughter? A traveler trying to end these atrocities summons the wizard Talifer. Talifer goes to the castle, and using his magic, turns one guest into a pig, one into a rat, one into a snake, one into a wolf, and then he turns Dracula into a vampire.
By night you shall be a vampire. A vampire that gluts himself on human blood and gives to every victim the foulness of its own spirit. You shall go through the ages as a ghastly lesson to those who'd follow your path. By day, your body will lie in the coffined loneliness of the vaults of the castle. Only at sunset shall it rise to wallow in its baskless hatred of humanity. Alone, you say? Not for long. My little daughter will join me. My little. You think you can defeat me? I, who have lived for centuries, conquered the full forest of the Turks, and the others who have tried to capture me.
Dracula was Bela's greatest role, and this would have given him a chance to play him again while he was still young and had that sex appeal going. And he could explore all new aspects of the character. Dracula is Vlad the Impaler. Dracula is immortal, and his reaction to becoming a vampire. Just like how Boris Karloff got to explore new aspects of the monster in The Bride of Frankenstein. Dracula's gone after the first act, which is why I'm placing it at number 3 and not number 1. Now, the rest of the script is different, but I think just as good as the movie. What happens is, this guy on vacation goes up to the castle. Dracula's daughter bites him. Then his friends and Professor Van Helsing try to save him and destroy Dracula's daughter. Number 2. Arsenic and Old Lace. Arsenic and Old Lace is a classic and hilarious dark comedy, and is based on a hit Broadway play, where Boris Karloff starred as the murderer, Jonathan Brewster, who just killed a man because he said he looked like Boris Karloff. Boris was great in this role, and that line brought down the house, and they do like 4 or 5 variations of it throughout the play. When they made the movie, the Broadway producers wouldn't let Boris Karloff out of his Broadway contract because he was too big a draw. Now, Warner Brothers considered casting Bela Lugosi, but ended up going with the more mainstream star Raymond Massey instead, and kind of made him up to look like Frankenstein's monster. But what makes this such a missed opportunity is what came after. In 1941, Josephine Hull, who played Abby Brewster in the play and the movie, was visiting the Lugosis, and asked Bela if he would replace the actor playing Jonathan Brewster in Chicago. And Bela said no, because according to his wife Lillian, with his pride, he didn't want to do a Boris Karloff role. But in 1943, he agreed to do the play at the Tivoli Theater in San Francisco, but with one little change to the dialogue.
You shouldn't have killed him, Johnny. He was a nice fellow. He gives us a lift, and what happened? He said I looked like Bela Lugosi.
He chose not to see Boris Karloff in the play because he wanted to make the role his own, and audiences and critics loved him as Jonathan Brewster. He went on tour with it throughout the Midwest and the East, and would continue to do different productions of it throughout the years. In some cities, it did better with Bela Lugosi than it did with Boris Karloff, and according to Gary Rhodes, many reviewers believed his interpretation of the role was highly original and even superior to Karloff's. David Hanna at the LA Daily News said that Bela gave the role a vitality that was lacking in Boris Karloff's portrayal, and it gave the whole play a faster pace. So in terms of working on stage, this became every bit a signature role for him as Dracula was. And we're missing out. Now, Boris didn't do the movie either, but he did a radio version. He did a TV version. There's nothing of Bela. Raymond Massey does okay, but this part calls for a horror icon. And in this era, either Boris Karloff or Bela Lugosi. Number 1. A remake of Dracula that's in color and 3D. In the early 1950s, there was this 14-year-old kid named Richard Sheffield. And him and his friend tracked down Bela Lugosi's phone number. And they called it. They told him they were big fans. And Bela invited them over to his apartment. And they actually became friends. Altogether, there were 6 teenagers. And they would hang out at Bela's house and he would tell them stories. They would go to the movies. Bela would put on his cape for them. And one time, Bela even let one of them borrow his Dracula costume to wear to a Halloween party, and the kid won first prize. Now Bela, who was an avid reader, saw in the New York Times that Universal was interested in doing a vampire movie. And he had just been a special guest at the premiere for House of Wax, which was done in 3D and in color. And he thought this should be done for Dracula, and to modernize it for a whole new generation, with him as the Count. Bela told the kids this, and these kids, who had formed their own Bela Lugosi fan club, came up with a petition. And over their summer break, and remember, they were 14, they couldn't drive. They knocked on doors, they went to movie theaters when they let out, and they even went to local businesses and got hundreds of signatures saying, "I want a Dracula remake starring Bela Lugosi." As the president of the Bela Lugosi fan club, and the closest one to him, Richard Sheffield typed a letter to go with the petition, and they mailed it to Universal Studios, who did nothing. But if they got behind it, I think it could have been great. 1950s color is so flashy and cool looking, and the 3D was so much more fun. Yes, it gave it more depth, but they also had things jump out at you. For Dracula, you could have the bat fly out at you, you could have Dracula's hand pop out at you, and it would be like he was hypnotizing the audience. You could do stuff with his cape, cobwebs, and with fog. Bela was older, so he wouldn't have the sex appeal, but there's something really creepy about his elderly Dracula, and it would fit with how Dracula starts out in the book. By the 50s, the play, which was the basis for the original film, was already getting dated, so they could have gone back to the book and used some of the scenes and dialogue that they hadn't used before.
Welcome to my house. Enter freely and of your own will. My revenge has just begun. I shall spread it over centuries, and time is on my side.
How fantastic would it be to hear Bela Lugosi say that? He would sound so evil. And it wouldn't be stepping on the toes of the original at all. You could cast Richard Carlson as the young Dr. Seward, like he is in the book, and have him be the male lead instead of Jonathan Harker. Julie Adams could be Mina. Bring back Edward Van Sloan as Professor Van Helsing. And I know it's cheating because he wasn't known for horror yet, but Anthony Perkins is Ranfield. If Universal gave it a good budget and did it right, I think it would have been spectacular. And Bela and those kids would have been so proud. Now, I know this is assuming again, but I don't think Bela would disappoint them. I think he would give the Dracula performance of a lifetime. I would love any movie with Bela Lugosi. And there are so many that he was supposed to do. But if I had to pick just 10, based on what I've learned, those 10 would be it. So thank you for joining me at my Dracula's Castle, and for imagining the top 10 movies that Bela Lugosi almost made.